It was Halloween night, and the small town of Pine Hollow was covered in fog. The streets, typically quiet, were filled with children in costumes, rushing from house to house in search of candy. Yet a feeling of unease seemed to hang in the air, as if something sinister was lurking just beyond the reach of the light. Among the festivities, there was one figure who stood out: a clown. But this was no ordinary clown. His face was painted in eerie shades of white and red, his eyes hollow and unsettling, like two deep voids that sucked in the light. His hair was an unnatural shade of green, matted and greasy, and his smile was too wide, stretching impossibly across his face. It was a smile that didn't seem friendly. It looked hungry. As the night wore on, the clown made his way through the streets, following the children as they ran from door to door, laughing and shouting. At first, no one paid him much attention. After all, it was Halloween, and clowns were just another common costume. But the clown wasn't interested in joining the fun. He was watching. In the farthest corner of Pine Hollow, at the edge of the forest, there stood an old, decaying house. No one had lived there for years, but tonight, it seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The clown's footsteps echoed as he made his way to the house, a slow, deliberate pace. He disappeared inside, leaving behind only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Hours passed, and the children of Pine Hollow had returned home, their bags filled with candy. But something was wrong. One by one, parents began to notice their children were missing. At first, it was just a few, but soon panic spread throughout the town. The police were called, and a search party was organized. But as they scoured the streets and the woods, they found nothing. It was as if the children had simply vanished. The next morning, the town was in a state of shock. The fog still hung thick in the air as the search continued. Then, a gruesome discovery was made. At the old house at the edge of the forest, the eerie bodies of the missing children were found. But what made the scene even more horrifying was the way they were positioned. Each child was arranged in a circle, their faces frozen in terror, their eyes wide open, and their bodies mutilated in grotesque ways. And in the center of the circle stood the clown. His smile was even wider now, his eyes gleaming with madness as he held a blood-stained knife. The message he left behind was clear: "This is my art." But the terror didn't end there. Weeks later, rumors began to spread about the clown's presence. People claimed to see him in the shadows, lurking on street corners or standing just beyond the light of their windows. And every time the town gathered, whether it was for a party or a simple gathering, there was a strange sense of dread. No one knew if the clown was still alive, but his presence seemed to haunt Pine Hollow, like a nightmare that refused to fade. It was said that on Halloween night, if you stood at the edge of the woods, you could still hear the faint sound of laughter, distant but chilling. And if you looked closely, you might just catch a glimpse of him, the clown, forever waiting, forever smiling. As the years passed, the horror of that Halloween night in Pine Hollow faded into whispered rumors. The town attempted to move on, but the legacy of the clown never truly left. Children, now older, would recount the story with a mixture of fear and fascination. Halloween was never quite the same, with many families leaving town for the night, unwilling to risk a return of the evil that once walked their streets. But there was one person who couldn't let go of the past: Detective Samuel Briggs. He had been part of the initial investigation years ago, but the mystery of the clown's identity gnawed at him, consuming his every thought. The case had gone cold. No clues, no evidence, just the mutilated bodies and the haunting image of the clown's smile. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something still lurked in the shadows of Pine Hollow. One autumn evening, Briggs received an anonymous letter. It was written in smudged red ink, the handwriting jagged and erratic. The letter read, "You should never have left. I never stopped watching. Come find me, detective. I've been waiting for you. Chills crawled down his spine as he read the words. The letter was unmistakable. It was the clown, or at least someone, who claimed to be him. It was a challenge, a call to finish what had been started. Without hesitation, Briggs packed his bags and returned to Pine Hollow. The town was much quieter than it had been years ago. The children had grown, and many families had left, unable to shake the memory of what had happened. The streets were empty, the houses abandoned, and the once thriving community was now little more than a shell of its former self. The fog, which had been a strange constant over the years, rolled in thick and heavy, suffocating the town in its cold embrace. Briggs made his way to the old house on the edge of the woods, the place where the clown's reign of terror had begun. The house stood like a silent sentinel, its windows broken, its roof sagging. Despite the years of neglect, there was an air of malevolent energy surrounding it, as if the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting for something to happen. Tai stepped inside, the creaking floorboards protesting under his weight. The air was thick with the smell of decay and rot, and the shadows seemed to move in the corners of the room. As he ventured deeper into the house, Briggs's flashlight illuminated strange symbols drawn in red on the walls, symbols that seemed familiar, like something he had seen in the old files from the original investigation. The clown had left his mark, not just on the victims, but on the very fabric of the town. Then, in the dim light of his flashlight, Briggs saw something that made his heart stop. On the far wall of the basement was a large, cracked mirror. It was old and tarnished, but there was something unnerving about it. As he approached, the reflection that stared back at him was not his own. Instead, there was the clown, standing behind him, his grotesque smile stretching wider than ever before. The clown's eyes glimmered with madness, and his pale face was painted with a thick layer of blood. Briggs spun around, but the basement was empty. He was alone, or so it seemed. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, low and menacing. "I've been waiting for you, detective. I knew you would come back." The voice came from the shadows, deep and mocking. The temperature in the room dropped, and Briggs could feel his breath turning to vapor. He fumbled for his gun, but his hands were shaking too much. The clown's figure materialized from the darkness, his face even more distorted and monstrous than before. His clothes were tattered and stained, but his smile, oh that smile, was the same. The same as it had been that night. The same as it had been in the mirror. "You thought you could stop me," the clown taunted, his voice dripping with malice. "But I'm not just a man. I'm a symbol, a nightmare, and Pine Hollow. Pine Hollow is my canvas." Briggs's heart raced. He had known something was off about this town, but he had never imagined this. The clown was no mere murderer. He was something far worse, something that had become part of the town itself. With a sudden lunge, the clown was upon him, his hand gripping Briggs's throat with inhuman strength. The detective's vision blurred as the clown's laughter filled the room, a sound so deep and haunting that it made his bones rattle. "You don't understand," the clown whispered, his face inches from Briggs's. "I am Pine Hollow. I am the ball. Fear that never dies, the terror that will never fade. You're just part of the art." Briggs struggled, gasping for air, but it was no use. The clown's grip tightened, and as darkness began to take over, Briggs's last thought was a chilling realization. The clown wasn't just a murderer, he was a curse. A curse that would never be broken, no matter how many years passed. And as the detective's body went limp, the clown smiled wider than ever. Months later, Pine Hollow began to change. The air felt heavier, and people started disappearing again. But this time, it was different. The clown was no longer a figure lurking in the shadows. He had become something far worse, a presence woven into the very soul of the town. It was said that on certain nights, if you walked the streets of Pine Hollow, you could hear the faint sound of a child's laugh, followed by the eerie creak of a broken door opening. And if you looked closely, you might just see the outline of the clown standing at the edge of the woods, watching, always watching. Because the clown had never left Pine Hollow. He was still there, in the dark corners of the town, waiting for the next victim to step into his nightmare, and for anyone foolish enough to return, he would be ready. It had been years since Detective Samuel Briggs disappeared into the darkness of the old house on the edge of Pine Hollow. The town, long since abandoned by most of its residents, had become a forgotten memory, a place whispered about in passing, conversations, a place that time itself seemed to have forsaken. But the story of the clown, of the terror he had brought, still haunted those few who remained. And there were rumors, strange and unnerving, that would never die. One rainy night, a group of travelers, strangers to Pine Hollow, were passing through the area. Their headlights cut through the thick fog, casting long, eerie shadows on the abandoned roads. They had heard nothing of the town's dark history. To them, Pine Hollow was just another stop on their journey, a sleepy town long forgotten by the world. They found the old house. It had stood there, forgotten, but not empty. The boards creaked in the wind, and the windows stared blankly into the void like empty eyes. The house had become a landmark for those foolish enough to venture near it. But for the travelers, curiosity overcame caution. They pulled into the overgrown driveway, their tires crunching against the gravel. The wind howled through the trees, and the fog, thick as blood, surrounded them. A young woman named Sarah, the most adventurous of the group, led the way to the front door. She knocked, half expecting no answer, but to her surprise, the door creaked open with a faint moan, as if it had been waiting. The others hesitated, but Sarah pushed inside, the scent of decay and dampness immediately filling the air. "What are you doing?" one of the men, Mark, called after her. "This place is falling apart, we should leave." But Sarah had already vanished into the darkness of the hallway, her flashlight cutting through the black like a knife. They followed, reluctantly, as the shadows seemed to grow thicker around them. The house seemed alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that made their skin crawl. They reached the basement door, the same door that had once been opened by Briggs, and Sarah didn't hesitate to descend the creaking stairs into the depths. "This place feels wrong," whispered Ellie, her voice barely audible as she clung to Mark. But Sarah was already halfway down, her flashlight flickering with each step. It was as though the house was rejecting their presence, like it was alive and aware of their intrusion. When they reached the basement, they saw the symbols on the walls, just as Briggs had years before. But there was something more. The walls were lined with old photographs, faded and cracked, with images of children, faces twisted in terror, each one seemingly staring out from the frame, their eyes pleading for help. And then, at the center of the room, they saw the mirror, the cracked, tarnished mirror. It seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural light. Sarah, overcome with an inexplicable compulsion, stepped toward it, her breath shallow. As she gazed into the glass, her reflection seemed to shift. Her face morphed, her eyes widening in terror as she saw the clown standing just behind her, his grotesque, painted face, his twisted smile, and those dark, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into her soul. He was so close, so real, that she could feel his breath on the back of her neck. "Get away from it," Ellie screamed, but it was too late. The clown in the mirror stepped out, not as a reflection, but as a physical being, his presence choking the air. He reached out with bony fingers, dragging Sarah toward him. Her scream echoed through the basement, a sound that seemed to stretch out, never-ending, like it was being pulled into the very walls of the house. The others froze, paralyzed by terror. As Sarah's body was dragged into the shadows, her screams abruptly silenced. Then came the laughter. It started softly, a low chuckle that sent chills crawling up their spines. But it grew louder, more maniacal, until it shook the foundation of the house itself. The clown's laughter filled every corner, a sickening sound that reverberated in their minds. The darkness seemed to bend and twist, alive with malicious intent. "You shouldn't have come here," the clown's voice rumbled, deep and hollow. It was a voice that felt like it was coming from every direction at once, from the walls, from the air itself. Mark, shaking with fear, backed away, but the room seemed to close in around them. The door that had once been open was now sealed tight, the walls pressing inward as if the house itself was trying to consume them. "Leave, now," Ellie begged, but it was too late. From the shadows, more figures began to appear. Children, their faces contorted in fear, their eyes wide open in eternal terror. They reached out, their hands ghostly and cold, as if begging for someone to rescue them, but their mouths remained sealed, unable to speak. Their bodies were twisted, broken in ways that defied nature, their once innocent faces now forever locked in a silent scream. And there, in the center of the room, stood the clown. His face even more distorted now, his smile stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. "You were all part of the art," he whispered, his voice so close now that they could feel his breath. "Pine Hollow is my masterpiece, and you are the final strokes." Ellie tried to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She was frozen in place, her mind screaming, but her body betraying her. The clown stepped closer, his hand reaching out to her face. As his fingers brushed her skin, the world seemed to vanish. She no longer saw the basement, the house, or even Mark. All she saw was the clown's face, his eyes, his twisted smile, his jagged teeth. With a sickening crack, her vision blurred, and in that instant, she saw it. Pine Hollow, covered in fog, empty streets, and the pale, ghostly faces of the children. They were everywhere, in the windows, in the shadows, their eyes never blinking, never moving, always waiting. "You're mine now," the clown whispered, and then everything went black. Weeks passed before anyone discovered what had happened to the travelers. Their car was found abandoned on the outskirts of town, but there was no sign of them, not a single trace. The town remained silent, the fog thicker than ever, and once again, the laughter of the clown could be heard echoing in the distance. Long after the sun had set, long after the last whispers of the town's cursed history had faded. For the clown was no mere figure of the past. He was a part of Pine Hollow, woven into its very fabric, and every time someone dared to step into his domain, he would be waiting, watching, smiling, because the art was never finished, and the clown would never stop creating.